This morning, is Texas becoming unaffordable? Texas already has one of the nation's highest property taxes, and they are going up again. So will state lawmakers do something about it next session? Democrat Beto O'Rourke has his own plan to lower our soaring taxes. Governor Abbott's extra border inspections cost the state $4.2 billion and never found anything illegal. So will Abbott pay a political price for it? Is it time to move on from the mask mandates? Congressman Colin Allred, a Democrat from Dallas, on that, and the bipartisan legislation that came from a recent trip on Air Force One. And why do Texas's historically black universities get so much less funding per student than UT and Texas A&M? State Rep Jarvis Johnson from Houston with the numbers on what it will take to achieve parity.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. Before we get to our guests, let's begin with some of the biggest political headlines that have people talking here in Texas. The president of Mexico slammed Texas Governor Greg Abbott over his extra inspections of trucks at the border. President Obrador called it despicable, among other things. Abbott backtracked on the inspections after criticism from both sides of the border. President Obrador also said that Mexican governors in the northern part of his country had no authority to enter into so-called security agreements with Texas, a foreign country. The 10-day debacle that Abbott initiated cost Texas $4.2 billion in lost trade. We'll talk about whether he pays a political price for this later in the program. Texans got sticker shock in the mail over the last few days. Property appraisals are out and they are up, and that means your property taxes, your mortgage payment, or your rent will likely be going up again as well. Texas already has some of the nation's highest property taxes. Our Roundtable has a lot to say about this later in the program. And a grand jury in Houston has indicted conservative activist Stephen Hotze and a former Houston police captain on 2 felony charges. They are accused of holding an air conditioning repairman at gunpoint 2 years ago. You might remember this case. They thought this AC guy had fraudulent ballots from the 2020 election. He did not. Hotze's attorney called the charges outrageous. Let's begin with something that happened on Air Force One recently. A bipartisan bill was born when President Biden flew to Fort Worth a few weeks ago. Congressman Colin Allred, a Dallas Democrat, was on that flight with a Republican colleague. And Allred took our questions on this legislative idea they came up with and where he stands on 2 other big issues making news right now.
Congressman Allred, welcome back to the program. I want to ask you about the federal mask mandate struck down by a judge. The Biden administration is going to appeal that. Is it time to move on?
Well, I think it is time to allow folks to decide for themselves whether or not they want to wear a mask. I do think it's important, though, for the CDC to have the ability to impose requirements going forward for other pandemics that may come along, or unfortunately, if this pandemic, has another variant that pops up, we still need to be able to have ways to protect our people. So that's where I think the appeal comes in, is just to maintain that ability. But I do think it's time for us to allow folks to make their own choices when traveling about whether or not to wear a mask.
Congressman, President Biden announced that Title 42 is ending next month. Been in the news a lot lately. That gives Border Patrol the right to turn asylum seekers around, using the pandemic as an excuse there. Some Democrats, though, now want to keep it in place. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah. Well, Title 42 is a public health measure. It's not immigration policy. And I've said for some time that we need to have a comprehensive reform that also includes funding for us to properly process folks who are seeking asylum at the border quickly, so that we don't have some of the issues that we've seen with this. So I think there has to be, if this policy is going to end, there has to be a plan on how to replace it, and also a reform going forward. I hope that we can do that in a bipartisan fashion. I know our business community here in North Texas is basically dying for us to have a comprehensive immigration reform, because they need the workers and they want to see us reform our immigration system so that it works better for our economy.
Does the president need that plan in place first before revoking Title 42?
I think we need to hear where we're going to go from here on immigration. And I think we need not be afraid to talk about it, particularly for us in Texas. We deal with this, of course, every single day. My grandfather was a customs officer after the Second World War. My family grew up in Brownsville. I know that this has gotten really out of hand to the point where not only when we're talking about undocumented immigration, but folks who want to come here, contribute to our economy, maybe come here as students and stay here are not able to do so. That's really why we need to have a comprehensive reform here that commits resources to the problem at the border, yes, but that also makes our immigration system work better for our economy as a whole.
Congressman, you are leading a bipartisan bill to build and upgrade VA hospitals all across the country. Dallas would get a new spinal cord injury center for veterans. El Paso would get an entirely new VA healthcare center, but there are projects from New York, Mississippi, Missouri, Oklahoma, all the way to California involved here. Is there support in Congress to get something like this passed?
I think so. And I really want to thank Jake Elsey for working with me on this. This is really born out of us flying back together to Fort Worth on Air Force One, back and forth for a veterans press conference and event with the president, and we got to talking about ways we could work together for our veterans here in Texas. As most folks know, we have a lot of veterans in our state. We're the second highest veteran population in the country. We'll be number one very soon. And there's been a lot of interest in the Congress in funding these really critical projects to allow the VA to operate better. And for us in North Texas with the spinal cord facility getting more funding, that's really important. You also mentioned the El Paso facility that's going to be coming online because of this funding. And really across the country, we know that we have a lot of facilities that are 50, 60, 70 years old in the VA system that need to be updated. And this is a good time to invest in them.
Congressman, you are on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, as we all know, but to my knowledge, you've never served in the military. Why have you made it a focus to work so hard on veterans issues and VA hospitals all across the country?
Well, I think we have a sacred commitment to our veterans. As a former football player, I do think there is kind of a kinship between football players and veterans, and some of the things that after our careers that we deal with, and also during my career, we did a lot of things with active duty folks and with veterans while I was playing, and so for me, it's something that's natural. I'll tell you, there's really, for me, in my time in Congress, there's been no more rewarding issue than seeing the impact we've been able to have with our veterans. It's been bipartisan. I've been able to get folks from very different, I would say, political viewpoints at times to join me on pushing for these issues. And it really has helped move the ball for a lot of our veterans, not only here in North Texas, but across the country. And I'm really proud of that.
Congressman, thank you for the time.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason.
For decades now, Iowa and New Hampshire have cast the first votes in presidential primaries. And for a while now, many candidates on the national level have complained that neither of those states is really diverse or really reflective of the country's changing demographics. So the Democratic National Committee is rethinking which state goes first, and Texas wants in on this. Ross Ramsey, the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune. Ross, a lot of tradition is tied up in this, and people might, forget that the political parties control the primaries. How likely is it that this tradition will be busted up and that Texas might actually get a shot at it? And why would it matter, I guess?
Well, I guess the likelihood depends on the clout of the candidates and whether they think they're going to do better with New Hampshire and Iowa up front, or a big state like Texas up front. Texas wants to get in to have a little clout here, have a little more say in who gets the nomination. But Iowa and New Hampshire and tradition are all heavily defended right now.
Indeed so. Having covered that a few times, Iowa's very proud of its caucuses up there. We've noticed here in Texas kind of a weird political shift lately. Greg Abbott and Ted Cruz are endorsing different Republican candidates in the runoffs. What's going on there? Why the split?
Well, go to the Wayback Machine for a minute. When Greg Abbott was the Attorney General of Texas, the Solicitor General, who's an Assistant Attorney General, was a guy named Ted Cruz. So they go way back, and they've got a really close association, and they're from more or less the same wing of the Republican Party. And they're on the opposite sides of 6 different Texas House runoffs in the Republican primary next month. Mostly over charter schools, and they've just split on these. So I guess at the end we'll settle up and see who won.
We will indeed. Ross, back to you in a moment. Thank you. Coming up next, Texas lawmakers give considerably more money to students at UT and Texas A&M than the state's 2 historically black universities. State Rep Jarvis Johnson with the numbers this morning that he says need to change. And Texas has some of the highest property taxes in America. Beto O'Rourke with specific ideas on how he wants to lower them. We'll hear from him and Governor Greg Abbott in just a moment. And speaking of Abbott, is Greg Abbott going to run for president in 2024? What drives the 64-year-old politician and expert fundraiser? How much do you really know about Abbott? Mimi Swartz from Texas Monthly is on Y'all-itics with us this week to dissect the political rise of the Texas governor. This episode out now wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to Inside Texas Politics. State taxpayers help fund two flagship universities here, UT and Texas A&M, and two historically black universities, Texas Southern University in Houston and Prairie View A&M as well. But lawmakers give more money to some than others. State Rep Jarvis Johnson is a graduate of TSU. He now represents parts of Houston and Northeast Harris County and is among the lawmakers insisting on equality in public education. Representative Jarvis, welcome to the program here. Let's start with the question why on all of this. Prairie View and Texas Southern students get $2,500 less per student than UT and Texas A&M. That gap has doubled in the last year. Why isn't there more equality here?
They've used the formula funding as a reason and a justification for why this gap continues to increase. That formula funding was only created for those flagship institutions and asking Prairie View and Texas Southern to do more with less. There is no way Texas Southern and Prairie View will be able to reach the levels of research dollars, the levels of opportunities for doctoral candidates, all of those formula funding mechanisms that are in place, in my estimation, have been in place that have obviously created this gap and will never allow Texas Southern and Prairie View or even other smaller institutions to catch up.
Representative Johnson, I called you by your first name a moment ago. Apologize for that. But lay out this formula funding for folks who aren't familiar with how higher education is paid for in the state.
That's a Greek book made up of Greek letters that you don't understand. And I think it was done purposely. And I think it's a very difficult formula to understand. But essentially, it's based on graduation rates. It's based on retention rates, is based on the number of research institutions that you have, schools that you have, and all of that looks at it. But let's just take the smallest, easiest, most digestible formula, and that is graduation rates and attendance. So what they're looking at is how can a student graduate within 4 years of entering into college? Well, the Texas Southern and the Prairie View have a different dynamic. They're having students that oftentimes are first generation college students. They also have students that have to work full-time jobs and then go to school. They have students that are also providing for their families and so forth and so on. So the graduation rates, because Texas Southern and Prairie View educate a different population of students, will never be able to keep up with the 4-year graduation rate.
Let me ask you this last question briefly here, just final seconds. Do you have any hope that these universities will ever achieve parity?
I'm always keep hope. That's the reason why I fight. I'm going to always keep hope. But when we look at this disparity, when we look at two land-grant colleges here in Texas, right, Prairie View and Texas A&M, we fund Texas A&M to the full freight of $194 million when the federal government says you only need to give them 94. Well, we give them 194. Prairie View received $23 million from the federal government. We're supposed to match those dollars, and we only matched that with $4 million. That in itself shows me that we still have disparity and that we still look at these institutions as, well, we don't need to give them all of the money, and yet we're asking them to do more with less, when simply we're supposed to be being fair across the board. So yes, situations like that make me cringe and make me upset, but it also fuels my fire to keep fighting and to keep bringing this type of information across the state to say that if we want the best for our students, if we want the best for our graduates, then we should be providing for all.
Representative Johnson, this is a fight we will keep watching. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Did you get your property tax appraisal yet? It is sticker shock all across the state. Higher property values mean higher property taxes, as we all know. And Texas is already among the highest in the country when it comes to property taxes. Democrat Beto O'Rourke says if he is elected governor, there are some specific ideas that he would pursue to lower what we pay. This morning, both gubernatorial candidates weigh in on this issue, beginning with O'Rourke.
In the 7 years that he's been governor, property taxes have gone up $20 billion in the state of Texas. That's an increase of 40% over where we were when he first began. I just left a meeting in Fannin County where one resident there told me that she is being priced out of her home right now. She just got her appraisal in. And with that increase in the appraisal, with the increase in the property taxes that she's paying, she wonders whether she's going to be able to stay in her home. Far too often, corporations and the very wealthiest are getting out of their fair share. And that's because the law under Greg Abbott allows them to do that. We need fairness in appraisals, and we need fairness in what people are paying in their property taxes. Most homeowners cannot afford the lobbyists or the attorneys that can contest corporate valuations. And so corporate property owners are able to bring down their bills by billions of dollars every single year. As governor, I'm going to work with the legislature to ensure that we have full sales price disclosure in the state of Texas so that everyone is paying their fair share, which means that homeowners and renters will pay less going forward.
We want your property taxes to go down. And as Robin was articulating, this is something that I have been working on every single session. Let's go back in time. Go back in time to when I was first running for governor, and I came to talk to the Kingwood Tea Party. And I told the Kingwood Tea Party that if you elect me to be governor, I will cut your property taxes. We have every session that I've been governor, we have cut your property taxes.
So here's the question. Are the state's sky-high property taxes making Texas unaffordable? State lawmakers will have billions more to spend in January. Will they buy down what we pay? The Roundtable is waiting to talk about this one when we come back.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross Ramsey is back with us from the Texas Tribune. Bud Kennedy is here from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas, joins us each week for this segment. Ross, let's start with you. Property appraisals are out across the state. Sticker shock for a lot of folks. Who didn't get the sticker shock, I guess, is the question. But this always means that property taxes are likely to go up next year, too. You point out that lawmakers might actually have some options when they return to Austin in January.
Yeah, they've got a couple of things going on. You know, appraisals are up. Everybody's seeing that now. Tax rates will be set over the summer, and the actual tax bills will be set in October. When the lawmakers come back, though, you know, they've already worked on trying to hold appraisals down. They've got $26 billion that they didn't have before in surplus and savings that Glenn Hager, the controller, has pointed out. And they have the opportunity possibly to buy down some of the taxes, to raise what the state spends on public ed and lower what local taxpayers have to put up.
But how likely is that? And do you think that any of these property appraisals are out that might affect the candidates running in the runoff elections next month?
Yeah, that's good to hear, Ross, because my property appraisal is up something like 20%. I think everybody else's is too. These are just through the roof, and I can't imagine what it's like now to be a candidate out on the trail trying to get a bond issue passed. Voting starts tomorrow. Trying to get elected to a city council or a school board. Suddenly everybody wants to talk about their taxes. People are not going to be in the mood to spend more money.
Bernadine, at the end of the day, the question is Texas becoming unaffordable?
In a lot of areas. But you know what, as Bud just said, people are really not going to be interested in spending a lot of money to help taxpayers. But we do need help. I think all of us need help in terms of paying our taxes, and a lot of questions will be asked these candidates as to how they're going to lower taxes. Because you know what? It's a shocker to get that bill.
It is. You just heard Bud, 20%. I can't imagine what anyone else's is here too. Ross just sold his place in Austin, arguably the most expensive city in the state. But Ross, let me ask you about Governor Abbott. The other big story too, the quote border blunder. Ray Perryman from Waco, the economist, says that the extra inspections that Abbott wanted the troopers to conduct for 10 days cost $4.2 billion in lost trade, 36,000 jobs. Is this something that could stick to Abbott, because we're still a long ways out from the election?
Well, I think it's going to hold his hand when he tries to do it, or if he thinks about trying to do this again. If you interrupt international trade, you interrupt international trade, and it's really expensive. It's the biggest trading partner for Texas and for the U.S., and it costs money to stop those trucks.
Indeed so. Does Abbott pay a political price for this, Bud?
I don't think at all. You haven't seen any Republicans complain about it except Sid Miller. And even Sid Miller kind of backtracked and said, well, I really like the governor, even though he's wasted $4 billion. Don Huffines praised it and said, this is what I wanted to do all along. We are living in Don Huffines' state right now.
And to your point, Bud, Bernadine, Democrats have not really seized on this at all, it seems like, at least in messaging.
I know, because everybody knows that something needs to be done about the crossings at the border. And Abbott is showing his constituents, his voters, that he's doing something. So at this point, Abbott is riding high in terms of trying to curtail the migrants that are crossing the border.
And Bud, when we look, I'm sorry to cut you off there, Bernadine, Bud, when we look at what's going on in Florida with Disney, with Ron DeSantis, the governor there, and we see what's happening here, do businesses stick with the GOP come this fall?
We don't see businesses speaking up at all. I mean, businesses aren't going to the Democrats, and they're just kind of going home and sulking. They're not moving their money at all.
Yeah, indeed so. Bud, thank you. Ross, thanks a lot. Bernadine, thank you as well. We appreciate you watching every Sunday too. We're back again next week to take you inside Texas politics, and hope you can join us then. Until then, have a great week.